May 8, 1942. The Coral Sea, south of New Guinea. The pilot, Lieutenant J.G. John F. Smith, drifted alone in the vast, unforgiving emptiness of the Pacific. Hours earlier, his F-4F Wildcat had taken a crippling hit during the furious close-quarters engagement that would later be known as the Battle of the Coral Sea, the first naval battle in history fought entirely by aircraft operating hundreds of miles apart. His survival depended on a miracle, or more accurately, on a single, improbable machine designed decades before the war he was fighting. Above him, the sky offered only indifferent sun. Below him, the water promised a slow, certain end. His radio was useless, the life raft offered scant protection against the elements, and the nearest friendly carrier group was days away, if it was still afloat. The conventional wisdom of air combat dictated that once you went down in the Pacific, you were simply erased. The ocean was the ultimate executioner. Yet, in that immense silence, an entirely new promise of salvation was being forged. The war's relentless push across the map was creating an impossible humanitarian crisis, sacrificing pilots who represented years of training and expertise, an irreplaceable resource. The U.S. Navy desperately needed a lifeline, a flying ambulance capable of defying the limits of range and endurance, a massive, vulnerable giant that could land on the waves and deliver hope. Suddenly, after what felt like an eternity, a low, throbbing, unmistakable sound began to materialize on the horizon, not the scream of a fighter, but the steady, heavy churn of twin radial engines. It was the sound of the consolidated PBY Catalina, the unlikeliest of warplanes, coming to perform its defining, world-changing mission. It was the sound of the Dumbo. The conflict in the Pacific Theater was fundamentally defined by its sheer, punishing scale. Unlike the European campaigns, where a downed pilot stood a reasonable chance of being captured or rescued by nearby ground forces, the war against Japan unfolded across thousands of miles of featureless, open water. This vast, empty expanse transformed every forced landing, or ditching, into a near-certain death sentence. Early in the war, the recovery rate for airmen forced down was abysmal, often falling below 20%, making the ocean the single deadliest factor outside of direct combat. This reality demanded a rapid and radical shift in military thinking. Salvation could not come from ships or ground troops, it had to come from a machine capable of operating within that same deadly, remote environment. The staggering loss of aircrew quickly evolved from a statistical problem into a profound strategic disaster. While the United States possessed the industrial might to rapidly replace aircraft, often outproducing the enemy by 10-to-1 margins, it could not manufacture the years of skilled expertise represented by a veteran fighter pilot or a seasoned navigator. These men possessed invaluable combat experience, complex tactical knowledge, and mastery over complicated machinery. Losing 1,000 aircraft was a matter of industrial bookkeeping. Losing 1,000 experienced aviators was an existential threat to the offensive drive. Preserving this irreplaceable human capital became the highest non-combat priority for the entire carrier fleet, directly impacting the sustained effectiveness of the entire campaign. The psychological toll of fighting over the ocean was devastating. Pilots, constantly aware that mechanical failure or enemy fire meant almost certain death by drowning, exposure, or hostile capture, faced immense stress. To maintain the aggressive, high-risk operational tempo required to win battles like Midway and the Coral Sea, the command structure recognized they needed to create a psychological safety net. Knowing that a dedicated, long-range mechanism for recovery was operating nearby acted as a powerful morale booster. It instilled confidence and encouraged pilots to press their attacks harder, knowing that the military was committed to their personal survival. Air-Sea Rescue, ASR, thus transcended mere humanitarianism, becoming a critical operational requirement essential for preserving the fighting spirit and efficiency of every air group. The need for a long-range air rescue vehicle was urgent, but the requirements were unique. The craft had to be capable of extreme endurance, carrying capacity, and, critically, landing on open water. No existing aircraft met these criteria. Naval designers had to hastily adapt existing platforms. The PBY Catalina, initially designed as a patrol bomber, was the only aircraft that possessed the necessary trifecta of robust hull design, massive fuel capacity, and inherent amphibious capability. Already in service and structurally sound, it was the sole existing platform that could be immediately diverted and pressed into this desperate new ASR role, becoming the unsung lifeline that actively preserved the strategic and psychological foundation of the Pacific War effort. The PBY's most distinct and vital engineering feature was its boat-like hull, which instantly conferred the ability to operate equally well from a conventional runway or the turbulent open ocean. This was not a conventional aircraft hastily modified for water. It was fundamentally a seaplane built from the keel up to be a reliable, buoyant vessel. The aircraft maintained stability on the water via two large, streamlined pontoons, or sponsons, located underneath the wings. For land operations, these crucial pontoons could be elegantly retracted flush into the wing roots, drastically improving its aerodynamics and granting the PBY the designation amphibian. This essential dual capability was operationally critical, allowing the Catalina crew to deliver rescued personnel to any available facility, be it a remote island base or a major naval air station, without needing specialized docking infrastructure, thus minimizing turnaround time and maximizing its readiness for the next life-saving call. The sturdy, deep-V hull was specifically engineered to withstand significant buffeting, enabling the Catalina to land in moderately rough seas where lesser seaplanes would be immediately disabled or capsized. The PBY Catalina was arguably the endurance champion of its entire generation. This incredible capability stemmed primarily from its monstrous internal fuel capacity and its conservative, efficient engine configuration. Mounted high above the fuselage on a large parasol wing, its twin reliable Pratt & Whitney radial engines operated at optimal cruise efficiency, minimizing fuel consumption over extremely vast distances. The parasol wing structure provided necessary clearance from the ocean spray during water takeoffs and landings, and simultaneously offered a perfect mounting point for the immense fuel tanks. This design synergy granted the PBY an operational range that routinely exceeded 2,500 miles and a standard flight time that could comfortably stretch past 20 hours. No other aircraft could effectively patrol such enormous swathes of the Pacific or reliably reach airmen stranded in the deepest, most remote combat zones. This phenomenal long-distance endurance meant a single Catalina could patrol as a guardian for hundreds of square miles of ocean for an entire day or night, serving as a persistent sentinel of salvation. Another subtle but vital design feature was the PBY's outstanding visibility, which inherently made it the ideal search and observation platform. The flight crew operated from a spacious, high-mounted cockpit, providing an expansive view over the surrounding ocean landscape. Crucially, most versions were equipped with large, convex bubble windows, or blisters, positioned just aft of the main wing, originally intended for defensive machine gun stations. In the ASR role, these blisters immediately became perfect observation posts, allowing multiple crew members to meticulously scan the waves below for the telltale signs of distress, a tiny life raft, a flash of signal mirror, or the plume of smoke from a barely visible distress flare. Flying relatively slowly at a low altitude, the PBY could conduct meticulously patterned searches, utilizing its stable airframe to keep the distant, shimmering ocean surface under constant, exhaustive scrutiny, a vital advantage when seeking a single human being in the world's largest body of water. In stark contrast to the sleek, complex, high-performance fighters that dominated the war, the Catalina's sheer simplicity proved to be its greatest strength in the rescue role. Its top speed was considered glacial by high-performance wartime standards, but this low cruising speed was, in fact, perfect for sustained, deliberate searching and made the inherently dangerous open-water landings far easier and safer. Furthermore, the PBY was famously durable and easily repaired in the field. Its basic, rugged structural framework and redundant systems meant it could absorb substantial damage from enemy fire, or more commonly, from the heavy punishment of landings on turbulent seas, and often still managed to return home. This inherent resilience was absolutely essential for ASR missions, where the aircraft constantly operated at the extreme limits of its range, far from established repair depots. The Catalina was engineered to stay in the air, and most importantly, on the water, long enough to decisively complete its life-saving mission. The consolidated PBY Catalina began its career long before the insignia of rescue graced its enormous wings. Designed in the mid-1930s, its initial and critically important assignment was long-range maritime patrol and anti-submarine warfare, ASW. Its phenomenal radius of action made it ideal for convoying cargo vessels across the vast Atlantic and methodically hunting enemy submarines in the immense, empty reaches of the Pacific. The PBY carried substantial internal bays designed for depth charges and torpedoes. It was conceived as a long-living hunter, intended to serenely and methodically scan the waves, not as a participant in aerial combat. Nevertheless, it was precisely its inherent design strengths, its near-impossible endurance and its capacity to carry a large crew, that fatefully predetermined its later, far more benevolent mission. The critical turning point arrived immediately after the first major carrier battles, such as the Coral Sea and Midway. The losses of aircraft were tragic, but the far greater calamity was the inability to recover pilots from the water. As hundreds of highly experienced aviators perished in the ocean depths, military command immediately recognized that an amphibious flying boat capable of setting down on the high seas was worth more than dozens of new fighters. The PBY, which was already performing distant reconnaissance duties, became the sole available platform capable of switching priorities from seek and destroy to seek and save. The need was so acutely felt that this transformation occurred dynamically under wartime pressure, quickly reassigning entire squadrons from ASW to the Vital Air Sea Rescue (ASR) role. The PBY Catalina rescue aircraft quickly earned the affectionate, yet accurate, nickname Dumbo, named after the animated elephant who could fly despite his visible clumsiness. This name carried a dual meaning. It reflected the plane's somewhat ungainly, huge appearance, making it seem slow and vulnerable in the combat zone, but simultaneously emphasized its magical, almost unbelievable ability to appear in the remotest locations and return men to life. For pilots adrift in the open sea, the throbbing sound of its engines was not just another aircraft, it was the living symbol of the Navy's unbreakable promise that they would be recovered, transforming Dumbo into the single most anticipated and emotionally significant sound in the entire Pacific Theater. The transition of the PBY to the specialized rescue role demanded a rapid but highly effective operational retrofit. Aircraft designated for ASR missions were immediately stripped of all redundant bomb bay equipment and the majority of their heavy defensive armament, which was unnecessary for rescue operations. The newly freed space within the fuselage was swiftly utilized for medical kits, supplies of drinking water, concentrated rations, and additional rescue rafts. The most vital physical modification was the addition of lifting gear and specialized stretchers to facilitate the arduous task of hauling injured pilots from the water onto the deck through the side hatches, an extremely challenging operation in a choppy sea. This rapid repurposing, accomplished literally within days, allowed the PBY to function as a reliable, floating first aid station capable of operating exactly where no other plane dared to set down. The Air Sea Rescue mission, affectionately nicknamed the Dumbo Protocol, was initiated the moment an airman was confirmed to have successfully bailed out or ditched his aircraft in a known combat area. The execution began with painstaking coordination and rapid deployment. PBY crews were instantly scrambled, often following the distress coordinates provided by the last radio message or the observing aircraft. Once in the broad area, the Catalina pilot and crew implemented meticulous search patterns, typically flying low-altitude, grid-like tracks to systematically cover the huge expanse of the ocean. Crew members constantly scanned the water through the transparent observation blisters, looking for minute signs of life, the faint yellow flash of a dye marker, the tiny silhouette of a life raft, or the hopeful glimmer of a signal mirror. Success hinged entirely on speed and precision. Every hour spent drifting drastically reduced the survivors' already slim chances of survival against exposure, dehydration, and the unpredictable life of the ocean. The most perilous stage of the entire Dumbo mission was the calculated, often terrifying risk of the open water landing. Unlike routine training exercises conducted in calm, protected bays, the PBY often had to set down on the choppy, unpredictable waves of the open Pacific. The pilot was required to be an expert seaman as much as an aviator, carefully assessing the swell height, wind speed, and wave direction to execute the perfect, delicate alignment. A successful landing required bringing the heavy aircraft down precisely within the trough between wave crests, minimizing the shock to the hull. A serious misjudgment could lead to a catastrophic pitchpole, ripping the hull open, or snapping the massive wings, instantly turning the rescue plane into another tragic piece of wreckage. The crew fully understood that the act of saving one life meant potentially sacrificing their own machine and their own lives to the volatile, merciless sea. Once the Catalina was safely settled on the waves, the true physical challenge of extraction began. The PBY's high, buoyant hull presented a significant obstacle. Crew members had to open the side hatches and deploy ropes, lines, or specialized lifting gear to haul exhausted, often injured men out of the water and up onto the deck. This was a brutal physical undertaking, made incredibly difficult by the surging water and the constant, violent motion of the flying boat. The crew often had to lean precariously out of the hatches, fighting the relentless waves and the immense, waterlogged weight of a soaked pilot. In situations where the sea was simply too rough to risk a landing, the PBY would carefully taxi close enough to drop medical supplies, motorized rescue rafts, and vital drinking water, while relaying the precise coordinates to faster surface vessels and acting as a persistent aerial guardian until surface relief arrived. Due to their inherently low speed and pronounced vulnerability, PBYs operating near active combat zones were absolutely dependent on a fighter umbrella provided by the Combat Air Patrol, CAP. These vital escorts, usually the fast, heavily armed Hellcats or Corsairs, acted as guardians, protecting the slow, often poorly armed Dumbos from opportunistic enemy fighters who recognized the immense strategic and morale value of eliminating a rescue aircraft. The PBY crews, however, frequently had to operate beyond the safe range of these friendly fighters, forcing them to rely on low visibility, the cover of darkness, or sheer luck to complete their mission. The sight of a PBY bravely holding station near a hostile island, often operating entirely alone, was a profound and lasting testament to the bravery of the air-sea rescue crews, who continually pushed the boundaries of their machine's safety margin in the name of comradeship. The operational life of the PBY Catalina was defined by a profound paradox. It was simultaneously the Pacific's most celebrated savior and one of its most effective, terrifying night predators. While its humanitarian service as the Dumbo saved thousands by day, other Catalina squadrons were stripped of their life-saving gear, painted a stark, non-reflective matte black, and sent out to hunt under the moonless night skies. These infamous black cats were deployed not to pluck pilots from the sea, but to silently stalk and destroy Japanese supply lines, turning the bulky, slow-moving flying boat into a specialized, long-range nocturnal bomber. The transformation was complete. The same aircraft that represented the promise of life during daylight hours became the harbinger of death and logistical chaos after sunset. The success of the Black Cat hinged upon two key technological advancements that neutralized the PBY's natural slowness: the cover of darkness and early airborne radar. Operating at night and flying extremely low to the water made the all-black aircraft virtually invisible to enemy surface ships and shore-based lookouts. The PBY crews were pioneers in the use of primitive air-to-surface vessel (ASV) radar, which allowed them to methodically scan the inky blackness for the telltale radar returns of Japanese merchant shipping, barges, and small, vulnerable convoys attempting to slip supplies through Allied patrol zones. Once a target was acquired, the Black Cat would often switch off its engines briefly, gliding silently through the darkness before illuminating the target with flares and delivering a devastating attack with bombs or depth charges. The Black Cat squadrons were focused less on major naval vessels and more on the humble logistics of the enemy supply chain. These missions targeted the slow, heavily laden Japanese barges and merchant ships, vessels that were the lifeline for isolated garrisons across the island chains. The cumulative effect of these methodical night attacks was devastating, systematically strangling the flow of food, fuel, and ammunition to forward operating bases. This continuous harassment forced the Japanese to expend valuable resources on protecting mundane supply runs, diverting destroyers and patrol craft away from crucial fleet engagements. The Black Cat, though slow and appearing antiquated, was a highly effective agent of attrition that choked the enemy's ability to wage sustained, long-term warfare. The PBY's defining characteristic, its massive endurance, proved indispensable to both its humanitarian and combat roles. The same 20-hour capability that allowed the Dumbo to search deep into the Pacific also allowed the Black Cat to fly an entire night patrol, locating targets, engaging, and returning without needing intermediate refueling. However, the use of the Catalina as a frontline bomber increased the overall danger to the platform and its irreplaceable crews. Every engagement risked the aircraft being sufficiently damaged to be removed from ASR service, thereby reducing the available fleet of lifelines for downed airmen. The operational success of the Black Cat came with the hidden cost of constantly balancing the strategic imperative to attack with the humanitarian necessity to save. The ultimate success of the air-sea rescue effort cannot be measured in ships sunk or bombs dropped, but in the irreplaceable human lives recovered from the hostile ocean. While precise wartime figures are complex, the PBY Catalina squadrons are credited with saving thousands of airmen and sailors throughout the Pacific and Atlantic theaters. Each individual pulled from the water represented an immediate, profound return on investment for the Allied forces. These weren't just men, they were veteran pilots, expert navigators, and trained gunners whose combat skills were essential to winning the next battle. The ability to return these highly specialized personnel to duty quickly and safely stemmed the hemorrhage of expertise that had threatened to cripple the entire air campaign in the early years. The Catalina's contribution effectively flipped the survival statistics, transforming a near-certain death sentence into a temporary inconvenience. Perhaps the Catalina's most vital contribution was the psychological safety net it successfully cast over every Allied aviator. Before the dependable ASR system was rigorously established, the dread of ditching was often a greater source of anxiety than the fear of facing enemy fire. Pilots frequently hesitated to press an attack or push their machine to its operational limits, knowing that the smallest technical failure meant a certain, lonely disappearance. The profound knowledge that the massive, unmistakable Dumbo was scanning the horizon, ready to risk everything to find them, fundamentally changed that equation. This assurance boosted morale across every carrier deck, cultivating a culture of necessary aggression and calculated risk-taking. The PBY crews were effectively selling confidence as much as they were saving lives, creating a vital psychological edge that was intangible but absolutely crucial to sustaining the Allied offensive's momentum. The rescue missions themselves were frequently exercises in extreme, spontaneous heroism. PBY pilots often received high commendations for courageously landing their large, slow, virtually unarmed aircraft in waters that were still actively contested by enemy forces. There are legendary accounts of Catalinas descending into bays known to be covered by Japanese shore batteries or deliberately flying into known attack corridors to retrieve airmen before they could be captured. The greatest operational risk often came after the landing, with the PBY crew having to remain motionless on the water for extended periods while exposed to distant fire, battling the relentless waves, and struggling to physically haul survivors aboard. These extraordinary acts of selflessness, performed tirelessly day and night, earned the PBY crews the deep, eternal gratitude of every fighting man who flew over the Pacific. The air-sea rescue mission extended beyond simple self-interest. While their primary objective was to recover Allied personnel, PBY crews occasionally demonstrated the universal ethic of rescue, sometimes recovering survivors from sunken enemy vessels, Japanese sailors, German U-boat crews, or Italian airmen, when no other Allied craft was available or suitably equipped. Though these instances were rare and often controversial, they underscored the unique, humanitarian nature of the Catalina's role. It was a mission fundamentally dedicated to preserving life, regardless of uniform, operating in a theater otherwise wholly dedicated to wholesale destruction. The Catalina thus transcended its purely military function to become a symbol of compassion and unwavering commitment against the merciless indifference of the sea. Though the cessation of hostilities in 1945 ended the immediate, frantic need for large-scale combat ASR operations, the PBY Catalina's utility was far from over. Its incredible reliability, low operational cost, and unique amphibious capabilities ensured it a long, productive life in military service across the globe. The aircraft continued to serve in various air forces and navies well into the Cold War era, where it performed vital search and reconnaissance patrols, often flying along disputed coastlines and maritime borders where geopolitical tensions lingered. Its remarkable adaptability allowed it to transition smoothly into demanding roles ranging from essential weather monitoring and high-altitude Arctic surveying to transporting critical goods and personnel to remote outposts that completely lacked proper runways. The PBY's inherently dependable design proved that efficiency and long-term utility often outweighed the superficial demands of speed and cutting-edge, high-cost technology. The true, ultimate measure of the Catalina's robust and adaptable design came in its remarkably successful transition to the demanding civilian sector. Thousands of surplus PBYs were purchased by entrepreneurial private companies and skillfully modified for roles essential to peacetime commerce and safety across several continents. Perhaps the most dramatic of these post-war missions was the aircraft's celebrated transformation into the air tanker or water bomber, a critical, powerful tool for fighting vast, devastating forest fires in North America and Australia. The Catalina's rugged hull allowed it to swiftly skim a lake or bay, efficiently scooping up thousands of gallons of water in mere seconds before delivering its extinguishing payload onto a raging wildfire. Furthermore, Catalinas served as rugged cargo and passenger transports, reliably connecting remote communities and mines in underdeveloped regions where ground infrastructure was historically sparse or completely non-existent, cementing its reputation as a true workhorse of the skies. Decades after its first experimental flight, the PBY Catalina retains a deeply cherished place in global aviation history and public memory. It is often affectionately celebrated in museums and features prominently in classic war films and historical literature, though not primarily as a combat bomber, but rather as the unflappable guardian of the Pacific. Its highly unique silhouette, the massive high wing, the signature bubble blisters, and the distinctive boat hull, is instantly recognizable, symbolizing dependability, persistence, and the raw ingenuity of early amphibious design. The powerful, moving stories of the Dumbo missions, which actively preserved the lives of entire generations of aviators, have ensured that the Catalina's legacy is preserved less through destructive firepower and more through the profound moral commitment to human life it represented during the war's darkest hours. The enduring and defining legacy of the PBY Catalina is perhaps its final, unexpected paradox. An aircraft initially conceived for long-range maritime destruction ultimately became one of the Second World War's greatest instruments of humanitarian service. By saving thousands of irreplaceable lives and significantly boosting the morale that powered the Allied victory, the Catalina performed a strategic function far beyond the capabilities of any mere bomber or fighter. It stands today as a timeless testament to the value of mechanical endurance, crew adaptability, and the sheer courage of the men who flew them, forever defining the crucial and often unsung role of air-sea rescue in the complex history of mechanized global warfare.